Imagine this, a seasoned camper, far from the bustling noise of the world, deep in the heart of the very forest where this teen had vanished years ago. As he makes his way through the dense woods, searching for a quiet place to set up camp, his eyes catch something strange. Among the towering trees and thick underbrush, a knot in the wood catches his attention. And there, hidden beneath the surface, is a small leather-bound journal, worn with age, but unmistakably intact. Could it be hers? Could this be the missing piece to a puzzle that had never been solved? Now, you might be wondering what was in that journal. What could it reveal that had been lost to time? I know you're eager to know because, in just a few moments, you're going to get answers. Answers that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about this young girl's disappearance. Stick with me, because this story is about to take a turn you won't expect. But before we dive in, I want to take a moment to ask you something personal. Think about the last time you went hiking, or maybe just a walk in the woods. Did you feel safe? Did you feel like the forest was your friend, a peaceful place where you could lose yourself for a while? Now, imagine being out there, all alone, and then, without warning, something changes. The trees seem different, the sounds of the forest become unsettling, and you realize you're not as alone as you thought. What would you do? Would you panic? Would you try to find your way back? Or would you push forward, hoping that something in the wilderness could guide you? This is what we're dealing with here. A teen, a lone hiker, who simply disappeared. Gone without a trace, and yet, here we are, years later, with a journal that may unlock the mystery of her fate. But here's the twist. The journal doesn't just hold memories or simple notes. It's much more than that. The pages tell a story, her story, one that no one had ever fully heard until now. And as we explore this, I promise you, you'll uncover not just the truth about what happened to her, but about the world she left behind. So, why is this story so important? Because it's not just about a missing teen or a journal found in the woods. It's about something deeper. It's about the unknown, the things that lurk just beyond our understanding. It's about the connection we all share with the natural world, and how sometimes the wilderness is more unpredictable and dangerous than we could ever imagine. It's about the choices we make when we step into the unknown, and the consequences of those choices, whether we realize them at the time or not. And as you listen to her story unfold, you'll find yourself drawn into the mystery. You'll be hooked, wanting to know more, wanting to understand why this young girl's fate was sealed in the way it was. You'll feel her sense of adventure, her curiosity, and her fear as she navigates the challenges of the wilderness. And by the end of this video, you won't just have answers. You'll have a deeper understanding of the fragile boundary between safety and danger, and what happens when that line is crossed. But hold on, we're not there yet. I can already tell you're sitting on the edge of your seat, wondering what's in that journal, what it reveals about this teen's final days. What did she see? What did she experience before she disappeared without a trace? Keep watching, because soon, the answers will be laid bare in front of you, and the twists will come faster than you can keep up with. Now, before we dive into what the journal contains, let's talk about the forest itself. This isn't just any patch of wilderness. This is a place where people have disappeared for centuries. Strange occurrences have been reported here for decades, and yet, no one has ever been able to explain them. But as we peel back the layers of this story, the truth is bound to emerge, and with it a whole new perspective on the mysterious forces at play in these woods. Are you ready? Because what you're about to uncover will change everything you thought you knew about this case. The journal, this seemingly innocent object, is going to take us places no one expected. It holds the secrets that this teen carried with her into the forest, and now, we're going to follow the trail she left behind. But just when you think you know where this is going, something unexpected happens. The journal reveals more than just details of her journey. It reveals a deeper connection to someone or something that was with her in those final moments. And trust me when I say this is where things get really interesting. The teen hiker's name was Emma Carlson, a name that still lingered in the small town she had once called home. Emma was the kind of girl who was always on the move, always seeking adventure, always chasing the next thrill. But that restless energy, that drive to escape the mundane, was also what made her so unpredictable. To everyone who knew her, Emma was a mystery in herself. She had an energy that could fill a room, but also a tendency to vanish into the shadows, disappearing for days without a word. Her friends chalked it up to her free spirit, her need to roam and explore.
But not everyone saw it that way.
Some people in town whispered about her, saying that she wasn't just looking for adventure, but running from something deeper, darker, that had driven her into the wilderness that fateful day. Just weeks before Emma disappeared, she had been acting differently. Her friends noticed the change immediately. She was more withdrawn, her usual laughter replaced with long silences. She had always been an open book, sharing everything from her latest hiking trips to her fears and dreams for the future. But in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Emma had begun to pull back. It wasn't just her personality that had shifted, her behavior had become erratic. She canceled plans with friends, ignored texts and calls, and spent more and more time alone. One of her closest friends, Sarah, mentioned that Emma had told her she was planning a solo hiking trip in the nearby mountains, a trip that would take her far off the beaten path, into territory even seasoned hikers avoided. Sarah tried to talk her out of it, knowing how dangerous the area was, but Emma insisted. She had to do it. She needed to prove something to herself. She needed to be alone. The day Emma left, she didn't tell anyone exactly where she was going, just that she was heading into the woods for a while. Her parents didn't think much of it at first. After all, it wasn't the first time she'd gone off on her own. But when she didn't return, when days turned into weeks and weeks into months, that's when the panic set in. The authorities were called, search teams were organized, and volunteers flooded the area, combing through the dense woods for any sign of Emma. But there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign of a struggle. It was as if the forest had swallowed her whole. In the following months, there was a growing sense of dread hanging over the town. The locals, the ones who knew her best, began to wonder if something had happened that no one could understand. Something more than just getting lost. Emma's family, devastated and unable to cope with the uncertainty, held on to the hope that she would return. They refused to believe that she had disappeared by choice. But the longer she was gone, the more questions surfaced. Was there something Emma wasn't telling anyone? Was she hiding something that could explain why she left so suddenly? Some people in town started to suspect that Emma had gotten involved with the wrong crowd. They pointed to a few of her recent acquaintances, people who had a reputation for being troublemakers, people who had their own hidden agendas. There was Jake, the guy she had been spending a lot of time with before her disappearance. He wasn't the most upstanding guy in town, and rumors had begun to swirl about the two of them. Some said they were more than just friends. Others claimed Jake was a bad influence on her. But was he the reason Emma had gone off the grid? Or was there something more? The mystery only deepened when a few weeks after Emma's disappearance, a hiker, someone who had been in the area around the same time Emma had been, came forward with a strange story. He claimed he had seen a figure in the distance, just a shadow, moving through the trees. He didn't think much of it at the time, assuming it was just another hiker. But when he learned about Emma's disappearance, something about that moment felt off. He told the authorities about it, but by then, the trail had gone cold. The lead was never fully investigated, but it hung in the air like an unanswered question that was never allowed to be fully explored. Was Emma still out there, lost but alive? Or had something far worse happened to her, something that no one wanted to admit? It wasn't until years later when the journal was discovered that things began to make sense, sort of. As the camper flipped through the weathered pages, his hands trembling slightly, he realized that this wasn't just a travelogue or a collection of personal thoughts. It was a detailed account of Emma's final days before she disappeared. But the journal didn't just contain the typical entries one might expect. There were notes, scribbles, strange sketches, images of things that didn't quite make sense. Her writing grew increasingly erratic as the days wore on. At first, she had written with excitement, talking about the beauty of the wilderness, her love for the freedom it brought her, the peace she felt. But as the pages turned, her tone shifted. There were moments of confusion, fear, and what seemed like paranoia. Emma began to mention strange figures she saw in the woods, people who she couldn't quite identify, but felt were watching her. And then, one entry that chilled the camper to his core. I'm not sure if I'm alone anymore. I hear voices, but no one is here. Am I losing my mind? The more the camper read, the more it became clear that Emma had been spiraling. But who, or what, was she afraid of? Was she simply losing her grip on reality, or had something truly sinister been stalking her in those final days? Was there a connection to Jake, the questionable character from her past? Or was it something deeper, something tied to the very wilderness itself, a place known for its eerie quiet and sudden disappearances? But as the camper neared the end of the journal, the last entry seemed to hold the most significance. It was a final note, written in what appeared to be a frantic scrawl. They're coming. I don't know how to escape. Please forgive me. And then nothing. No more entries, no further explanation. The journal ended there, abruptly, leaving the camper with more questions than answers. The forest, it seemed, had taken Emma, and now, the journal might be the only way to unlock the truth of what happened. As the camper stood there, holding the journal in his hands, he couldn't help but wonder, was Emma's disappearance really a tragedy? Or was it a warning? What was it that she had uncovered in those final days, and why had she been so terrified? Could the journal hold the key to the mystery, or was it just another piece of a much larger puzzle, one that might never be solved? The deeper the camper dug into the mystery of Emma Carlson's disappearance, the more he began to realize that someone, or something, was actively working against him. At first, he thought the journal would be the key to uncovering everything, that it would be a simple matter of piecing together Emma's final days. But the more he tried to make sense of her increasingly erratic entries, the more he felt like he was being watched. Something about the way the journal had found its way to him didn't sit right, as if it had been left intentionally for him to find. And as he pored over the pages late into the night, he felt a strange presence lurking just beyond his awareness, as though he were stepping into something much darker than he had initially understood. One evening, after hours of carefully analyzing the journal, the camper made a disturbing discovery. He had come across a passage that mentioned a secret meeting Emma had with someone just days before her disappearance. It was cryptic, only a few lines, but it seemed significant, mentioning a place, an old cabin deep in the woods, and a name. Jake. The same Jake that had been a suspect in Emma's life, the same person who many believed might have had a hand in her vanishing. Emma's writing was quick and frantic, but she mentioned that she needed to meet him to settle things. Settle what? The camper didn't know, but this seemed like the breakthrough he had been waiting for. The next morning, he made his way to the cabin, the last known location mentioned in Emma's journal, feeling the weight of what he was about to uncover. But when he arrived, the cabin was no longer there. The foundation was still visible, broken and half buried in the dirt, but the structure itself had completely vanished. No trace. No sign of any recent activity. The camper stood there for a long time, his heart racing, trying to figure out how something like this could happen. Could it have been demolished? Could someone have come through and erased all evidence of the place? The emptiness of the site was more than just physical. It felt like a deliberate act of removal. It was as if someone didn't want him finding the answers. Frustrated and shaken, the camper returned to his car, but something wasn't right. His mind raced with questions as he scrolled through his phone. The journal. The cabin.
Jake.
There was one person who might be able to help him understand what was going on, a person who had been a distant friend of Emma's family, a man named Greg, a local who was known for his knowledge of the forest and its history. Greg had always been a bit of an enigma, someone who kept to himself and never really socialized with the rest of the town. But his knowledge of the area, especially its darker corners, was unrivaled. If anyone could shed light on the bizarre happenings surrounding Emma's disappearance, it was him. The camper decided to reach out to Greg, hoping for some insight, but as soon as he did, he was met with an unexpected response. Greg didn't want to talk. At first, the camper thought it was just hesitation, but then Greg's tone became sharp. "You need to stop digging into this. It's not what you think," Greg warned him, his voice cold and full of a fear that the camper couldn't quite place. There are things in those woods you don't understand. Things that don't want to be found. The words hung heavy in the air, unsettling him. There was a sudden urgency in Greg's voice that hadn't been there before. The warning was clear: stop looking. And yet, that warning only fueled the camper's curiosity. The mystery was growing deeper, and now, Greg's reaction was raising more questions than answers. Determined to get to the bottom of the truth, the camper pressed on, reaching out to the local authorities for more details. But once again, something strange happened. When he requested records and reports related to Emma's case, they were denied. The officer who answered his call was polite, but his tone quickly shifted when the camper pushed for more information. "The case is closed," the officer said. "There's nothing more to discuss. Please respect the privacy of the family." The line went dead before the camper could ask another question. It was clear now. There were forces at play trying to shut him down, and it seemed like every path he followed was being blocked. Someone somewhere didn't want the story to be told. But even more alarming was a phone call he received that night. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was Greg. But this time, he wasn't warning the camper to stop. Instead, his voice was frantic, almost panicked. "Listen to me," Greg said, his words coming fast. "I made a mistake. I should have told you this earlier, but I couldn't. There's something you don't know, something you need to understand. Emma, she wasn't just looking for solitude. There's a reason she went into those woods alone. A reason that goes back much further than you think." Greg paused, as if struggling with something, and then he whispered, "I'll meet you tomorrow. But you have to promise me you'll be careful. There are people who don't want you to know what really happened." Before the camper could respond, the line went dead. The call had ended as abruptly as it had started, leaving him with more questions than ever. What did Greg mean by people who don't want you to know? What was the secret that Emma had been running from, and why had Greg waited so long to reveal this? The closer the camper got to the truth, the more dangerous things seemed to become. Who could he trust? And was Greg really trying to help, or was he just another piece of the puzzle, one that was more twisted than anyone could have imagined? The next day, the camper went to meet Greg, determined to get the answers he so desperately needed. But when he arrived at the meeting spot, Greg wasn't there. Instead, the camper found something else, something that sent a chill down his spine. There, on the ground, was a torn piece of paper, its edges burned and charred, with a single, cryptic message written in a shaky hand. "The truth isn't meant to be found." The camper stood frozen, holding the piece of paper, his mind racing. What was happening? Who was trying to keep him from uncovering the truth about Emma? And why was Greg missing? The more the camper thought about it, the more he realized that someone very powerful, was willing to do anything to make sure the truth stayed buried. But the question now was, how far were they willing to go to keep that secret hidden? As the camper stood there, holding the paper, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees like a warning. The forest, once a place of adventure and exploration, now felt like a labyrinth, one that was closing in around him, trapping him in a mystery he wasn't sure he could escape. The camper couldn't shake the feeling that the paper he had found was only the beginning. He spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze, retracing his steps through the woods, trying to make sense of the strange message. His mind raced. The truth isn't meant to be found. It was a chilling sentiment, one that echoed in the back of his thoughts with every step he took. But as he stood in the clearing, the wind whipping through the trees and the weight of the forest bearing down on him, something shifted in the air. There was a rustling behind him. He turned quickly, heart in his throat, but there was nothing there, just the remnants of the morning fog clinging to the forest floor, like the last remnants of a dream slipping away. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end, an unsettling awareness that he was being watched. But by who? Just as the camper was about to leave the area and head back to town, his phone buzzed in his pocket. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it struck him. He answered, his voice hesitant, still on edge from the eerie encounter in the woods. "Hello." A voice, sharp and fragmented, replied on the other end. "You're not the only one looking for answers. The voice said, its tone urgent but muffled, as if trying to mask its identity. "I know what you're doing. I know what you found." The camper's pulse quickened. "Who is this?" There was a brief silence before the voice spoke again, the words dripping with frustration. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. It's bigger than you think. Emma, she wasn't the only one. You're playing with fire." The line went dead before the camper could respond, leaving him with more questions than ever before. Who had just called him? And how did they know about Emma? A cold chill settled over him, and his immediate reaction was to find someone, anyone, to help make sense of all this. But there was a problem. Just the day before, his best friend Sarah had been in town, and they'd had an intense conversation about the case. She had been curious, even intrigued, by the mystery of Emma's disappearance, but as the camper dug deeper, Sarah's interest seemed to wane. In fact, the more he shared with her, the more distant she became. Now, after the cryptic call, he couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to her disinterest than he initially thought. Could Sarah be involved in some way? Or was there something she was hiding from him? The answer came sooner than he anticipated. That evening, as the camper was about to head out again to follow another lead, Sarah showed up unexpectedly at his doorstep. Her face was pale, eyes darting nervously as she stepped inside. "We need to talk," she said quickly, her voice low and strained. There was something off about her, something that made the camper's stomach twist. "You've got to stop. You're putting yourself in danger." She wouldn't make eye contact, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together in front of her. It was the way she was acting that sent a wave of suspicion through him. "Sarah, what's going on?" The camper's voice was firm, but there was a deep unease rising in his chest. "What aren't you telling me?" She took a deep breath, and for a moment, it seemed like she might finally open up. But just as she started to speak, her phone rang. She froze, looking at the screen with wide eyes, and then quickly silenced the call. "I can't do this right now," she muttered under her breath, almost to herself. She turned away, heading for the door, but not before the camper caught a glimpse of a text message on her phone. It was just a short, cryptic sentence. "You know what's at stake. Stop talking to him." The words sent a cold shiver down his spine. Who was telling Sarah to stay away from him? And what did she know about the case that she hadn't shared? The camper felt a knot of suspicion tighten in his gut. It was clear now that this wasn't just a simple case of a missing girl. There were forces at play far beyond what he had imagined, and it seemed like they were closing in, ready to silence anyone who got too close to the truth. With a new sense of urgency, the camper decided to follow Sarah. He needed answers, and she might have the ones he was looking for. But as he crept through the dimly lit streets, trying to stay out of sight, he lost track of her. She had vanished into the night, as if she were hiding in plain sight. Every corner he turned led to more dead ends, more unanswered questions. Had she known more than she had let on? Or had she simply become another piece in the ever-growing puzzle? The next morning, as the camper sat alone in a cafe, staring at his phone in a daze, his thoughts swirled in confusion. He was so deep into the investigation now, so tangled in its webs, that he wasn't sure what was real anymore. That was when the call came again. This time, the voice on the other end was clear, too clear. "You're too far in now. You should have stopped before it was too late." The camper's heart skipped a beat. He didn't recognize the voice, but the message was loud and unmistakable. Someone was sending him a clear message, warning him away from the truth. But he couldn't stop now. Not when he was so close. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and determination. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before the voice finally spoke again, its tone colder this time. "It's not about you. It never was. It's about keeping the secrets buried. You're not the first to dig. You won't be the last, but you will be the one who pays the price." The line went silent again, leaving the camper alone with his racing thoughts. As he sat there, unable to shake the weight of the warning, something caught his eye. His phone lit up with a new notification. It was an image, a blurry photo, but one that was unmistakable. It was of Sarah. And in the background, almost imperceptible, was a figure, one the camper had seen before. It was the same man who had been lurking at the edge of the woods, the man who had watched Emma from a distance. The next few days felt like a blur, the camper's mind constantly racing with fragments of information, his every move shadowed by an overwhelming sense of dread. The photograph he had received, of Sarah and the man from the woods, kept playing over and over in his mind. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the blurry figure lurking in the background, a phantom presence that sent chills down his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming, that he was being pulled into a storm he couldn't control. The weight of the investigation had begun to press on him, a suffocating force that made it harder to breathe, harder to think clearly. He tried to reach out to Sarah again, desperate for answers, but her phone went straight to voicemail every time he called. He thought about visiting her apartment, but something stopped him, a nagging feeling that it wasn't just her silence he should be worried about. It was the fact that she might already be in danger. The voice on the phone, the cryptic messages, the warning, it was all adding up, and the camper knew that if he didn't get to the bottom of it soon, he might not get the chance to. One evening, as he was walking back to his car after a long day of searching for leads, he felt it, an unsettling, prickling sensation at the back of his neck. He turned his head slightly, scanning the street behind him, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The night was quiet, the streets empty, the usual sounds of the city muffled by the heavy fog that had rolled in. But as he continued walking, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. It was like a presence, an unseen force that hung in the air, just out of reach. He quickened his pace, glancing over his shoulder again. Nothing. But that's when he heard it, the sound of footsteps, faint but unmistakable, echoing in the distance. Someone was following him. The camper's heart rate spiked. He broke into a jog, his footsteps growing louder as they seemed to match the rhythm of the shadow trailing behind him. He turned down an alley, hoping to lose them, but the footsteps grew closer, faster, as if the stranger was closing in on him. Panic clawed at his chest. He couldn't outrun whoever it was. He wasn't even sure if he wanted to. His mind raced, thinking of all the possible outcomes. None of them good. He reached for his phone, ready to call for help, but before he could dial, a figure stepped out of the shadows. "Stop," a deep, gravelly voice commanded. The camper froze, his breath caught in his throat. The figure was tall, his features obscured by the dark, but the voice was unmistakable, one he had heard on the phone. The man from the woods. "I told you to stop," the man repeated, his tone hard and final. The camper could see the outline of something in his hand, a flash of metal, but he couldn't make out what it was. "You should have listened. You should have let it go." The camper took a step back, his pulse pounding in his ears. "What do you want from me?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. The man didn't answer right away. He simply stared at him, the darkness swallowing him whole. Then, with a chilling calmness, he said, "You're digging in the wrong place. You'll never find what you're looking for. And if you keep going, you'll be just like the rest." The camper's mind raced, trying to make sense of the threat. The rest? Who else had been involved in all of this? What did this man know about Emma? Before he could ask another question, the man took a step forward, the metal object glinting in the low light. It was a knife, its blade catching the faint glow of a nearby street lamp. The camper's instincts kicked in. He turned and ran, adrenaline surging through his veins, the sound of his footsteps drowning out everything else. He didn't dare look back, not until he reached the safety of his car. The door slammed shut behind him, and he quickly started the engine, his hands shaking as he drove off into the night. The image of the man still burned in his mind. But even as he put distance between himself and the threat, the weight of the encounter lingered. He had narrowly escaped, but it wasn't over. This wasn't just some random encounter, it was a warning. Someone didn't want him to uncover the truth, and they were willing to do whatever it took to stop him. As he drove through the darkened streets, his mind reeled. He thought about everything that had happened, Sarah's strange behavior, the warnings, the photo, and now the encounter in the alley. It was all connected, but how? And who could he trust? Was Sarah part of this? Or had she become another victim? He pulled into a gas station to gather his thoughts, but as he got out of the car, something caught his eye. A figure, standing across the street, watching him from the shadows. His heart skipped a beat. The figure was too far away to make out any details, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was unmistakable. He ducked behind a nearby car, trying to stay out of sight, but the figure didn't move. It stood there unmoving, as if waiting for something. The camper's stomach churned. Was this another warning? Or was it someone else, someone connected to Sarah, watching him now? He felt trapped, cornered in a game he couldn't escape. The stakes were higher than ever before, and as the figure disappeared into the night, he realized something even more chilling. They were closing in on him. Every step he took toward the truth only seemed to draw him deeper into a web of deception and danger. And no matter how hard he tried to fight back, he couldn't escape it. The camper's phone buzzed again. Another text message from an unknown number. His hands trembled as he opened it, only to find a single sentence that made his blood run cold. "We're coming for you next." His heart pounded in his chest as the weight of the message hit him. Whoever was behind all of this wasn't playing games anymore. They were ready to finish what they had started. The camper's mind raced with panic and confusion. He had to find Emma's journal. He had to find Sarah. But time was running out. And the more he dug, the more dangerous the situation became. He knew now, without a doubt, that he was in far deeper than he had ever imagined. And there was no turning back. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the message, "We're coming for you next." It played on a loop in his mind like a nightmare that refused to fade. The camper paced back and forth in the small, dimly lit motel room he had checked into at the edge of town, the shadows on the walls feeling like they were breathing, stretching, watching. He reviewed everything he had gathered: photos, voice memos, old trail maps, and scribbled notes from Emma's journal. It felt like chasing ghosts through fog. But then, somewhere between exhaustion and obsession, his eyes landed on one detail he had somehow missed. A name, quickly written in the corner of one journal page, barely legible, smudged with dirt, almost as if it was never meant to be seen. J. Maldon. The name meant nothing to him at first. He searched through his notes, through old articles and archived news clippings from the missing persons case. Nothing. Not a single mention of J. Maldon in connection with Emma's disappearance. But something about it felt deliberate, like a buried thread waiting to be pulled. Desperate for answers, he took a chance and ran a public records search. When that failed, he scoured local forums, hiker groups, even old park ranger logs. Hours passed with nothing but silence. Then, in a forgotten corner of a regional hiking blog from nearly 6 years ago, he found it. A comment left by a user with the handle jmaldon71 on a post about safe solo hiking routes through the canyon. The timestamp? 2 weeks before Emma disappeared. The blog post wasn't anything unusual, but the comment was strange. It warned readers to stay clear of the Western Ridge Trail. Too many go missing, and not everyone comes back. It was eerie in hindsight, almost prophetic. He dug deeper, tracing the username back to an old email tied to a local historical society based just 2 towns over. That's when he realized J. Maldon wasn't a fellow hiker or some anonymous online user. He was the former groundskeeper of the very state park where Emma vanished, a man who had abruptly resigned and vanished from public records only days after her case went cold. Not fired. Not reassigned. Just gone. Vanished. Like her. Armed with this new thread, the camper drove straight to the Historical Society building where the records had led him. It was late, but he managed to convince the night staffer, an elderly archivist with a cautious demeanor, to pull Maldon's employee file. It was thin. Too thin. A few peril sheets. A signed resignation letter with no explanation. But wedged at the bottom was a maintenance report. It described an unusual incident that occurred 2 nights before Emma's last known sighting, a complaint about strange lights deep in the woods near the northern boundary line, followed by a note that Maldon handled it alone. That was the last recorded entry attached to his name. The deeper the camper looked, the more unsettling it became. Multiple park visitors had reported hearing screams near the Western Ridge during that same week, reports that were never logged in the official investigation. But someone had made note of them. And in the margins of one old ranger incident sheet, there was a handwritten phrase in faded ink. Let it go. She knew too much. Confused and unnerved, the camper left the archive building and sat in his car, letting it all sink in. He thought back to Emma's journal, to the frantic tone of her final entries. She wrote about feeling watched, about stumbling on something she wasn't supposed to see. Until now, he had assumed it was just paranoia brought on by isolation. But what if it wasn't? What if she'd stumbled into something bigger, something someone was trying to keep buried? As he was piecing it together, his phone lit up with an incoming call, Sarah's name flashing across the screen. His heart jumped. He hadn't heard from her in days. He answered immediately. "Where have you been? Are you okay?" But the voice that replied wasn't Sarah's. It was low, familiar, and cold. "You were warned," the man said. The line went dead. Panic surged through him. He tried calling her back. Nothing. He called again. Voicemail. Again. Straight to disconnect. His fingers trembled as he pulled up her last known location from a shared tracking app they had briefly used during the search effort. Her last ping showed she had been at a cabin just outside of the park, an old ranger station that had been abandoned for years. He drove there without hesitation, heart pounding, headlights slicing through the darkness as the road narrowed into overgrown trail. The cabin loomed out of the trees like a ghost from a forgotten past. Boards hung loosely from the porch. The door stood slightly ajar. He stepped inside, flashlight sweeping across a layer of dust and decay. Empty beer cans. An old cot. And then a photo. His breath caught. It was Emma, standing in that very room, arms crossed, face tense. Next to her, half-shadowed but unmistakable, was Sarah. Everything stopped. A slow, icy realization crept in. Sarah had told him she barely knew Emma, that she'd only spoken to her a few times online before her trip. But this picture proved otherwise. They had been here together. She had lied. The questions came fast and violent. Why did Sarah hide her connection? Why was her phone now in the same place where Emma was last seen alive? And why was someone so desperate to keep the past hidden? The pieces no longer fit in the way he thought they did. The mystery wasn't just about a missing hiker. It wasn't even just about Emma. There was something else. Something deeper. Something that Sarah knew and hadn't told him. Someone had made sure Emma's disappearance would never be solved, and Sarah, the only person he thought he could trust, might have been a part of it all along. But before he could think any further, a sound behind him made him freeze. The creak of a floorboard. Not from him. From someone else in the cabin. He turned quickly, but saw nothing, only the open doorway and the growing darkness beyond. And then, from somewhere outside, a voice called softly through the trees. "You were never supposed to find this." The camper knew, in that instant, that everything was about to unravel. The silence outside the cabin didn't last long. That voice, calm, deliberate, almost surgical in tone, still echoed in his ears, a chilling reminder that this was no longer just a mystery. It was a trap, and he had stepped right into it. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but something stronger held him in place. The weight of all the unanswered questions, of Emma's journal, of that photograph with Sarah. If he left now, he might never know the truth. But staying could mean disappearing just like Emma had. He swallowed hard, flashlight trembling in his grip as he backed away from the window, heart hammering in his chest. He made it back to his car, locked the doors, and drove without direction, aimless and shaken. He didn't stop until he reached a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that always smelled like burnt coffee and yesterday's toast. He sat at the far booth, pulled out his phone, and stared at the photo again. Sarah had to answer for this. No more silence. No more half-truths. He called her, not expecting an answer. But this time she picked up. She sounded panicked, breathless, and when he confronted her about the photo, there was a long pause. So long. He thought she'd hung up. But then she whispered, "I didn't know it would go this far." Those words flipped something inside him. He pressed harder, demanded to know what she meant, who they were, why she'd lied about knowing Emma. Sarah was crying now, and her voice cracked when she said, "They told me to stay quiet. I thought if I stayed out of it, they'd leave me alone. But they never left. They never stopped watching." He begged her to meet in person, to tell him everything. But Sarah hesitated and then gave him an address, an old mill on the edge of town, another place that hadn't seen life in years. It felt wrong.
Too convenient.
Too quiet. But he knew he had no choice. He needed answers, even if it meant walking into danger again. When he arrived, the place was silent. Empty. Dust filled the air, thick enough to taste. But Sarah was there, standing in the shadows near a broken conveyor belt, arms folded, looking nothing like the anxious, terrified friend he thought he knew. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking, but there was something else in her expression. Resolve.
Guilt.
"You need to listen," she began, voice low and heavy with emotion. Emma didn't just vanish. She found something out here, something about the park, about what was happening to the people who went missing. She found out the disappearances weren't random. The words hit like a punch. Then who? Who was behind it? Sarah looked at him, eyes glistening. "I can't say. If I do, it'll be me next. But I can tell you this. Emma knew one of them. Personally. She tried to expose them. That's why she ran." Everything suddenly felt so much darker. The journal entries. The trail she marked. The warnings. Emma wasn't just a curious hiker. She had been investigating something sinister, and she had paid the price for getting too close. But before he could ask more, Sarah stepped forward and held something out to him. A flash drive. "It's encrypted, but Emma gave it to me before she disappeared. She said if anything happened, I had to make sure the truth came out. I couldn't. I was too scared. But now, you need to see what's on it." He took it with shaking hands, feeling the weight of it, not just the physical weight, but what it represented. A line had been crossed. This wasn't just about Emma anymore. It was about Sarah. It was about him. It was about whoever was still out there, watching, listening. But then came the impossible choice. As they stepped outside, headlights suddenly lit them up from across the gravel lot. A black SUV pulled in slowly, windows tinted so dark they reflected nothing. Sarah froze. "It's them." A man stepped out of the driver's side, dressed in a Park Services uniform that looked legitimate, but there was nothing official about his presence.
He didn't speak.
He only looked at Sarah, then at the flash drive in the camper's hand. "You can walk away right now," he said calmly, "and forget any of this happened. Toss the drive. Let the past die. Or you can keep digging, and you'll end up just like her." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The camper looked at Sarah, saw the fear in her eyes, and then looked at the flash drive again. Walking away meant safety. It meant life going back to normal. But it also meant betraying Emma and every truth she fought to uncover. Continuing meant risking everything, his life, Sarah's life, whatever was left of his peace of mind. But deep down, he already knew what he had to do. What he didn't know was that the choice was already made for him. Because when he got back to his motel that night, the door was ajar.
The room was trashed.
His laptop was gone. And in its place was a note pinned to the wall with a knife. One more step, and she disappears too. There was no signature. No way to trace it. Just one terrifying implication. Someone had been watching him the entire time. And now, someone else's life hung in the balance. The storm outside hadn't let up for hours. Lightning ripped through the night sky as he drove deeper into the back roads, each turn feeling less like a route and more like a descent into something far beyond his control. The flash drive lay on the passenger seat, now duplicated and stashed in multiple hidden places. He wasn't taking chances. He had already made that mistake once. The motel had been a warning. This time, if they came for him, they'd have to do more than just scare him. But the real shock wasn't just the threat. It was what he saw when he finally opened the files on that drive. Hidden behind layers of encryption was a folder titled Routine Reports. At first glance, they looked like normal park ranger logs, weather conditions, trail maintenance, wildlife sightings. But beneath the mundane were embedded documents, scans of redacted FBI communications, timestamps, names, and in the margins of one page, Emma's handwriting. 3 words. This goes higher. It wasn't just about a missing girl anymore. This was a cover-up. A full-blown operation. Names started jumping out. Rangers who were supposedly retired. Hikers who disappeared, only to be listed months later in closed investigations with suspiciously identical causes: exposure, accidental fall, animal attack. But what chilled him the most was one name in particular: Sheriff Paul Granger. The same man who had shaken his hand when he first arrived in town. The same man who offered to keep an eye out when he asked about Emma. His stomach twisted. Granger wasn't just part of it. He was helping bury it. Fueled by a sick mix of rage and disbelief, he drove straight to Sarah's place, only to find it deserted. No sign of struggle. No note. No warning. Just her phone, left behind on the kitchen counter, screen cracked, still logged in. There were recent messages. One from an unknown number. You said he wouldn't go this far. You lied. Another. We're cleaning up. Be ready. And that's when he realized he wasn't alone in the room. A floorboard creaked behind him. He spun around, heart in his throat, and there stood someone he never expected to see again. Tyler. Emma's ex. The guy who claimed to be devastated. The guy who'd helped search, cried to reporters, posted tribute photos online. Now he looked different. Leaner. Colder. He raised both hands like he meant no harm, but his eyes said otherwise. You weren't supposed to find it, Tyler said, glancing at the flash drive in the camper's hand. Emma didn't tell you about the cabin, did she?
Of course she didn't.
You were always the backup. The safe one. She never wanted you to get involved. The betrayal hit like a sucker punch. Tyler hadn't just known, he'd been part of it. Maybe not at the start, but somewhere along the line, he'd switched sides. The money, the protection, maybe even threats, it didn't matter. He had chosen his path. You think you know what's going on? Tyler stepped closer. You've seen a few files, a few cryptic journal entries, and now you think you're some kind of hero? You don't know the first thing about what she uncovered. This isn't about one girl. This is about the entire forest. It's a zone. A corridor. They've been using it for decades. Surveillance. Experiments. Extraction. Whatever you think Emma found, it was only the tip. The words didn't make sense at first. But then they did. All the disappearances. All the vague reports. The abandoned ranger stations. He remembered a note from Emma's journal. They're testing it on the wildlife. Next is people. He thought it was paranoia. A hiker's imagination gone wild.
But now.
You helped them, he said, his voice low. You let them take her. Tyler's eyes flickered with something like guilt, but not enough to stop him. I tried to warn her. She wouldn't let it go. I loved her. I still do. But love doesn't stop bullets. You don't know what they're capable of. Then came the sound of engines outside. Black SUVs again. More than one this time. This wasn't a warning. This was a cleanup. You need to give it to me, Tyler said, eyeing the flash drive. They won't stop until it's done. You think you're doing the right thing, but all you're doing is painting a target on every person you care about. And that was the moment the camper realized the scale of the conspiracy was far worse than he imagined. Emma wasn't just one victim. She was one of many. And what she discovered threatened something massive, something with resources, people in uniforms, a network that extended beyond just local law enforcement. But it wasn't just that. Tyler wasn't acting alone. Behind him, down the hall, he saw a shadow pass across the window. Someone else was inside. Multiple someones. The trap was closing. Again. He ran. Back into the storm. Back into the woods that started all of this. Because whatever was coming next, one thing was certain. They weren't going to let him walk away again. He didn't remember exactly how long he'd been running, just that the wind bit harder the deeper he went, and the trails seemed to vanish beneath the storm's fury. His breath was ragged, boots slick with mud, and somewhere behind him, the rhythmic crunch of boots signaled that they were still closing in. But he wasn't running aimlessly anymore. There was one last place Emma had written about in her journal. a location she never marked on any map, just described in code. Where the trees whisper in threes. It sounded like nonsense, the kind of cryptic poetry you'd chalk up to a lonely mind unraveling. But last night, after staring at that phrase for hours, it clicked. 3 trees, not just any trees, 3 white oaks with scorched bark, almost identical, standing at the edge of the southern ridge. A place he and Emma had once passed during a hike and barely paid attention to.
But now he knew.
That was where she buried the last truth. He stumbled into the clearing just as the rain slowed to a cold drizzle. The 3 oaks stood like silent sentinels, their dark trunks slick and gleaming under the stormlight. He dropped to his knees, tearing through the wet underbrush, hands shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Then he felt it would. A hatch, buried beneath a layer of soil and moss. He yanked it open and found a steel lockbox wrapped in layers of plastic and cloth. Inside, there was no treasure, no final goodbye, just a hard drive, a keycard, and a photo. Emma, standing in front of a rusted outbuilding with a logo that read, Black Hollow Site C. Not a ranger station. A government facility. One that never showed up on any civilian maps. Suddenly, floodlights. Voices.
Shouts.
They found him. He clutched the drive and ran, but the woods were no longer silent. Drones buzzed overhead, and dogs barked in the distance. But then came another sound, an engine. A beat-up jeep skidding to a halt on the ridge. Sarah. She screamed his name, flung the door open, and he dove in just as bullets tore through the trees behind him. The two sped off, headlights cutting through the fog as Sarah slammed the pedal to the floor. They got Tyler, she shouted over the roar of the engine. He turned on them.
Tried to help me escape. Didn't make it.
He didn't reply. His eyes were on the hard drive in his lap. His hands wouldn't stop trembling. Sarah's face was bruised, her shirt bloodstained. Someone had tried to silence her too. But neither of them were running anymore. They were heading straight to the source. 2 hours later, they arrived at the base of Black Hollow Ridge. Faded signs warned against trespassing. High-voltage fencing wrapped the perimeter. But the keycard worked. It opened a side gate, one rusted from time, almost forgotten. The inside of Site C felt like stepping into a ghost story. Long abandoned corridors lined with dusty monitors and crumbling cables. Rooms with sealed containers marked biological hazard. Surveillance equipment pointed at trails they'd both hiked countless times. And deep in the heart of the facility, room 17. Inside, they found the missing link. Stacks of folders detailing covert research on electromagnetic signal manipulation. How certain frequencies in isolated forested areas could trigger hallucinations, paranoia, even memory loss. It was never about protecting hikers, it was about testing them. Emma had stumbled on their remote testing grounds. Every missing person report was carefully rewritten, every body never recovered swept under layers of plausible deniability. One report even labeled Emma. Test subject breach, unauthorized intelligence exposure, status. Terminated. He collapsed into a chair. For the first time, the full truth hit. Emma didn't vanish. She was silenced. But then Sarah noticed something. A red blinking light under one of the desks. A live camera feed. A control panel that showed Site C was still active. Someone had been watching them since the moment they stepped inside. Before they could react, the door slammed shut. Gas hissed through the vents. Lights flickered. Then the monitor in front of them came alive. Sheriff Granger's face filled the screen. "You weren't supposed to make it this far," he said coldly. "But since you did, you might as well know the rest. We don't just run tests here. We create control." His voice was calm, almost smug. He admitted everything. The cover-ups. The psychological warfare. The way they used the forest as a living lab. Emma was a casualty. Tyler was a tool. Sarah had been tagged the moment she started poking around. And him? He was the last loose end. Then the feed cut out. He looked at Sarah, barely able to breathe. The walls were vibrating now, some kind of frequency pulsing through the building. Whatever they were doing, it was active again. And that's when he remembered the backup battery in his pack. The only thing powerful enough to short-circuit the system. He tore it out, jammed it into the control board, sparks flying as the room darkened. A low hum faded. The door lock disengaged. They ran. Out of the bunker. Into the rising morning fog. And as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, he turned back to see Site C, powerless.
Exposed.
But before the credits could roll in his mind, Sarah pulled something from her coat. A second keycard. Different logo. "Where'd you get that?" he asked, breathless. She looked at him, not with fear, but with something colder. "They never sent me to stop you," she said quietly. "They sent me to make sure you found exactly what they wanted you to find." And just like that, everything collapsed again. Because maybe Emma wasn't the only one who knew how to play both sides. The storm had passed, but the damage it left behind wasn't only in the trees or the roads. It lingered in him, in Sarah, in the questions that no longer had clear answers. The truth was out now, at least in pieces. The drive had been uploaded to a dozen off-grid servers. Journalists from independent networks, those brave enough to chase what mainstream media wouldn't touch, were already dissecting the data, spinning theories, drawing connections. Some called it a hoax. Others said it was the tip of a larger iceberg, hinting at covert psychological warfare, dark science, and Cold War-era experiments revived under new names. The official word from the authorities was silence, an intentional void that only deepened public suspicion. But those who knew, really knew, started to notice things. Trails suddenly closed for fire danger when no fires existed. Rangers transferred without explanation. Security cameras installed where there had never been power lines. And for him, the silence wasn't a comfort. It was a warning, because exposure didn't always bring change. Sometimes it just made the game more dangerous. Sarah disappeared 2 days after the footage leaked. One moment, she was at his side, sipping coffee from a chipped diner mug, watching the news in stunned disbelief. The next, her phone was dead, her car abandoned at a gas station 2 counties away, and her apartment completely wiped. No trace. Not a fingerprint. As if she had never existed at all. He wanted to believe she was running to protect herself, escaping the web before it tightened again, but a small part of him, the part Emma had awakened, whispered something darker. Maybe she was never really running. Maybe she was returning to where she came from. Because if what she'd said in that bunker was true, she wasn't just a bystander. She was a handler, a plant, a guide through a carefully constructed maze. Still, he kept digging. Not for revenge anymore, and not even for Emma. For the others. The ones who went missing and never came back. The families who were given hollow condolences and cold case numbers. He met with survivors who claimed they'd seen strange lights in the trees, who remembered days they couldn't account for, who had scars with no memories to explain them. They weren't crazy. They were test subjects. Collateral damage. One woman in Oregon described a cabin that mirrored the one from Emma's journal down to the crooked shutters and the ash-black soil. A boy in Colorado said he'd received a letter, handwritten, postmarked from a town that hadn't existed in 60 years, and inside was a photo. Emma, again, smiling, wearing a ranger's uniform with no badge. It didn't make sense. None of it did. But that's what made it real. Months passed. He moved out of the city, took up work as a park volunteer under a different name. He didn't trust the system anymore, but he understood its patterns. And he knew that sometimes the only way to stay safe was to blend into the trees and listen. He started getting messages, encrypted emails that vanished after being read.
Tips.
Warnings. Coordinates. Someone was still watching. But now someone else was helping. There was a shift happening. A silent rebellion made of whispers and shadows. He wasn't alone anymore. Then one morning, as the sun sliced through the misty treetops of a forgotten valley trail, he found something nestled at the base of a white oak. A small black notebook, weatherproof, bound tight with wire. He opened it slowly, heart racing. Inside, page after page of diagrams, notes, sketches, maps of the underground facility.
Names. Dates.
And on the final page, a single line in handwriting he'd recognize anywhere. You were never supposed to find the truth. But now that you have, what will you do with it? No signature. Just a symbol, a triangle inside a circle, drawn in black ink. He looked around. The forest was silent. No wind. No birdsong. And then the low hum returned. That same frequency. He stood still, breathing slow. Not afraid, not anymore. Just alert. Because now he knew something most people never would. The truth doesn't set you free. It changes everything. And sometimes it watches you back.